Welcome, dear traveller, to another journey with sleepless survivors. Tonight we drift across the vast Pacific Ocean, searching for echoes of a civilization that may have vanished beneath the waves thousands of years ago. Close your eyes, settle into comfort, and let us explore the mysteries of Mu, the lost continent of the Pacific. As you listen, allow your breathing to slow. Feel the weight of your body sinking into your bed, as if you too are descending through layers of time and ocean, down to where ancient secrets sleep beneath the coral and the sand. Our story begins not with certainty, but with whispers. Whispers carried on tropical winds, encoded in stone tablets, and remembered in the oral traditions of island peoples scattered across the world's largest ocean. Part 1. The Dreaming Ocean. The Pacific Ocean covers nearly 1/3 of our planet's surface. Imagine that vast expanse. From where you lie, picture water extending in every direction, farther than any journey you have ever taken. Within this enormous body of water, islands rise like mountain peaks, some volcanic and dramatic, others formed from ancient coral, barely rising above the waves. These islands seem isolated, separated by thousands of miles of open ocean, and yet, the peoples who live upon them share curious similarities. Similar myths, similar architectural techniques, similar legends of ancestors who came from lands now lost beneath the sea. For centuries, explorers and scholars have wondered about these connections. How did ancient peoples, without modern navigation, travel such impossible distances? Why do Easter Island's massive stoneheads seem to echo the monumental architecture of distant continents? What accounts for the sophisticated astronomical knowledge possessed by navigators who crossed the Pacific in simple outrigger canoes? Some have suggested that these similarities point to something remarkable. Perhaps long ago there existed a vast landmass in the Pacific, a continent or series of connected lands that served as a bridge, allowing ancient peoples to spread their culture, their knowledge, and their stories across what would later become isolated islands. This hypothetical land has been given many names, but the one that has captured imaginations most powerfully is Mu. Let your mind drift now across those dark waters. Imagine sailing at night, as ancient navigators did, reading the stars, feeling the swells of the ocean telling you of distant lands. The rhythm of waves becomes like breathing, rise and fall, rise and fall. And somewhere beneath those waves, perhaps, lie the ruins of cities that once touched the sky. Part 2. The Tablets of Mystery. Our modern story of Mu begins in the 19th century, with a man named Augustus Le Plongeon. A photographer, archaeologist and antiquarian, Le Plongeon travelled to the Yucatan Peninsula with his wife Alice in the 1870s. There, among the ruins of the ancient Maya civilization, he became convinced that he had unlocked secrets that traditional scholars had missed. Le Plongeon believed he could translate Mayan hieroglyphs, though his methods were not accepted by mainstream archaeologists. According to his interpretations, the Maya texts spoke of a great catastrophe. They told of a land called Mu, a continent in what is now the Pacific Ocean, that had been destroyed in a single night of fire and earthquake. He claimed that survivors of this cataclysm had fled to different parts of the world, carrying with them the advanced knowledge of their destroyed civilization. These refugees, Le Plongeon argued, had founded the great civilizations of antiquity: Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and the Maya themselves. The idea was intoxicating. It suggested that human civilization was far older and more interconnected than Victorian scholars believed. It implied that there had once been a golden age, a time when humanity possessed knowledge that was later lost and only partially recovered by successor cultures. Le Plongeon's theories were rejected by academic archaeologists. His translations were considered fanciful, based more on imagination than on rigorous linguistic analysis. But the seed had been planted. The name Mu had been introduced to the world, and it would soon find a much more influential champion. As you rest now, picture those ancient ruins. Limestone temples emerging from jungle greenery, stone carvings worn smooth by centuries of rain. Imagine running your fingers over those glyphs, wondering what stories they truly tell. The mystery is soothing in its vastness, like the ocean itself, too large to fully comprehend, inviting you simply to float upon its surface. Part 3. Colonel Churchward's Vision. The man who would transform Mu from an obscure theory into a widespread legend was James Churchward, a British occult writer who styled himself as Colonel Churchward, though the authenticity of his military rank remains unclear. In 1926, Churchward published a book titled The Lost Continent of Mu. It would be followed by several sequels, each elaborating on what he claimed was an ancient history revealed to him through secret tablets and esoteric knowledge. According to Churchward's account, he had learned of Mu during his time in India, where he befriended a Hindu temple priest. This priest, whom Churchward called his guru, showed him ancient clay tablets inscribed with a forgotten language. These tablets, the priest explained, had been written by the Nakals, holy brothers who had travelled from Mu to India in ancient times, carrying with them the sacred teachings of the motherland. The priest taught Churchward to read this ancient script. What he learned, or what he claimed to have learned, formed the basis of all his subsequent books. Mu, according to Churchward, was not merely a continent. It was the cradle of human civilization, the Garden of Eden itself. The continent had stretched across the Pacific, covering an area larger than South America. Its climate was tropical and pleasant, its lands fertile and abundant. The civilization of Mu had flourished for tens of thousands of years. Its people had developed advanced technology, sophisticated philosophy, and profound spiritual wisdom. They understood electricity and magnetism. They could manipulate forces of nature that modern humanity has forgotten. Their cities were architectural marvels, connected by roads and shipping routes that spanned their vast continent. At the height of its glory, Mu had been home to 64 million people, divided into 10 tribes or nations. These peoples lived in harmony, guided by a priestly class who maintained direct connection with cosmic forces. But paradise was not eternal. Approximately 12,000 years ago, catastrophe struck. The land of Mu was destroyed in a cataclysm of volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. Within a single day and night, the entire continent sank beneath the Pacific waves. Millions perished. Only a few survivors escaped, fleeing to the high mountains that would remain above water as the islands we know today. Churchward's narrative was detailed and elaborate. He provided maps showing Mu's supposed location and extent. He offered illustrations of Muan symbols and architecture. He wove together elements from mythology, archaeology, and geology to create a comprehensive alternative history of human civilization. The appeal was powerful. Here was a story that explained so much. It accounted for the similarities between widely separated ancient cultures. It suggested that humanity's deepest myths, the flood stories found in nearly every tradition, were memories of a real historical event. It proposed that we are the inheritors of a lost wisdom, fragments of which survive in our religions and esoteric traditions. Let yourself sink deeper now. Imagine that lost world, beaches of white sand stretching for hundreds of miles, cities of stone rising in terraces toward the sky, gardens where unknown flowers bloomed, their fragrances now lost to time, and at the centre of it all temples where priests studied the movements of stars, seeking to understand the fundamental laws that governed existence. This vision is like a dream within a dream. Rest in it. Let it carry you towards sleep. Part 4. The Nakal Records. Central to Churchward's claims were the mysterious Nakal tablets. These clay records, he insisted, were the proof of everything he described. They contained not only historical accounts but also spiritual teachings and scientific knowledge from the Mu civilization. The problem, skeptics noted, was that no one else had ever seen these tablets. Churchward could not produce them for examination. He could not reveal their location or provide independent verification of their existence. He claimed they were kept in secret by Hindu priests who would not allow outsiders access. When pressed, he suggested that the tablets had been destroyed or hidden away where they could never be found. This became a pattern in Churchward's work. He would cite sources that could not be verified. He would reference ancient texts that no scholar had heard of. He would present photographs that he claimed showed Muyan ruins, though archaeologists identified them as well-known sites from various cultures, often misinterpreted or mislabeled. Despite these issues, or perhaps because of them, Churchward's books found an enthusiastic audience. In the decades following World War I, many people were drawn to alternative histories and esoteric teachings. The war had shattered faith in progress and rationality. ancient wisdom traditions seemed to offer something that modern materialism could not. Churchward's Moo provided a comforting narrative. It suggested that humanity had once achieved greatness and could do so again. It implied that there were spiritual truths hidden beneath the surface of conventional knowledge. It offered mystery and wonder in an age that seemed to have lost both. The cosmic teachings of Mu, as Churchward described them, centered on the concept of a supreme deity he called the seven-headed serpent, representing the seven great forces of the universe. The people of Mu had understood that consciousness was fundamental, that matter emerged from spirit rather than the reverse. They had known that all religions were expressions of a single underlying truth, and that humanity's purpose was to evolve spiritually across many lifetimes. These ideas resonated with the Theosophical movement and other esoteric schools popular at the time. Churchward's Mu became part of a larger tapestry of alternative spirituality, woven together with Atlantis, Lemuria, and other lost lands that supposedly preceded our current civilization. As you breathe slowly, in and out, imagine those clay tablets. Imagine the feel of them in your hands, ancient and cool. Imagine symbols pressed into soft clay thousands of years ago, each mark carefully made, preserving knowledge that someone believed was too important to lose. Whether those tablets existed or not, the human desire to preserve, to remember, to pass wisdom forward, that desire is real, and ancient, and universal. Part 5. The Pacific Islands and their mysteries. Whatever we make of Churchward's claims about Mu, the Pacific Islands do present genuine mysteries that continue to intrigue researchers. Consider Easter Island, that remote speck of land in the southeastern Pacific, more than 2,000 miles from the nearest continental shore. The island is famous for its moai, the enormous stone statues that stand with their backs to the sea, gazing inland with haunting expressions. How did the ancient Rapa Nui people create these monuments? Each moai weighs many tons, and was carved from volcanic rock using only stone tools. The statues were then transported somehow, from the quarry where they were made to locations all around the island's perimeter. Some moai stand on platforms called ahu, carefully constructed ceremonial sites. Others lie fallen or half-finished, frozen in various stages of creation. For years, researchers debated how such feats were accomplished. Recent experiments have shown that with ropes, wooden sledges, and coordinated team effort, the statues could indeed be moved using methods available to ancient peoples. But this required significant organisation, resources, and determination. Why did the Rapa Nui invest so much effort in these monuments? The statues, scholars now believe, represented ancestors. They were a way of maintaining connection with those who had passed, ensuring that the spiritual power of the ancestors continued to protect and guide the living. The Moai faced inland to watch over the villages and agricultural lands. They embodied the community's history and identity. But there is something else curious about Easter Island. When Europeans first arrived in the 1700s, they found the island largely deforested, its population reduced, many of the moai toppled from their platforms. Something had gone terribly wrong in the island's history. Ecological studies suggest that Easter Island was once covered in palm forests. The Rapa Nui had used these trees for construction, for making canoes, for rollers and levers to move the moai. But as the population grew and the demand for wood increased, the forests were gradually cut down faster than they could regenerate. Without trees, the soil eroded, agricultural yields declined. The people could no longer build ocean-going canoes, cutting them off from fishing grounds and from potential contact with other islands. Social stress increased, leading to conflict between clans. The moai, which had once been a source of pride and spiritual connection, became a burden. Their construction ceased, and in some cases they were deliberately toppled. Easter Island's story is often cited as a cautionary tale about environmental destruction and the collapse of isolated societies. But it also demonstrates something remarkable. The Rapa Nui's ancestors somehow reached this tiny island in the first place, an incredible feat of navigation across vast stretches of open ocean. And Easter Island is just one example. Throughout the Pacific, islands were discovered and settled by peoples navigating in double-hulled canoes, using observations of stars, waves, birds, and clouds to find their way across thousands of miles of featureless sea. The Polynesians and Micronesians developed perhaps the most sophisticated non-instrument navigation system in human history. Master navigators memorized the rising and setting points of stars throughout the year. They learned to read the shape and pattern of ocean swells, which could indicate the presence of land beyond the horizon. They knew which birds flew far from shore and which stayed close to land, using them as guides. They understood how clouds formed differently over islands than over open water. This knowledge was passed down through generations, often kept within navigator families or clans. Young apprentices would spend years learning from masters, memorizing star paths and wave patterns, developing the intuitive feel for the ocean that true expertise required. When we understand what ancient Pacific peoples accomplished, the question becomes less about whether they needed a lost continent to explain their achievements, and more about properly appreciating the remarkable skills they actually possessed. Let your thoughts drift like an outrigger canoe on calm seas, back and forth, gently swaying. The stars wheel overhead in their eternal patterns. The ocean breathes beneath you. Everything is vast, and yet everything is knowable to those patient enough to learn its rhythms. Part 6. Lemuria and the Confusion of Lost Lands. Before we go further into the story of Mu, we should untangle it from another lost land with which it is often confused, Lemuria. Lemuria began not as mythology or occult speculation, but as a scientific hypothesis, though one that was quickly superseded by better evidence. In the mid-1800s, scientists noticed puzzling patterns in the distribution of animals and plants. For example, lemurs, the distinctive primates, were found in Madagascar and in India, but nowhere in between. Fossils of similar creatures appeared on widely separated landmasses. How had these species spread across such vast distances? In 1864, a zoologist named Philip Sclater proposed a solution. Perhaps, in the distant past, there had been a land bridge or even a continent connecting these regions. He called this hypothetical land Lemuria, after the lemurs whose distribution had sparked the question. For a few decades, Lemuria was taken seriously as a geological hypothesis, but as scientists learned more about continental drift and plate tectonics, it became clear that the continents had moved over millions of years, and that the distribution of fossils could be explained by this movement rather than by vanished land bridges. Lemuria as a scientific concept was abandoned, but the idea was picked up by Helena Blavatsky, the founder of Theosophy. In her massive work, The Secret Doctrine, published in 1888, Blavatsky described Lemuria as the home of the third of 7 root races that had existed on Earth. The Lemurians, in her telling, were giant beings, quite different from modern humans. They were more spiritual than physical, gradually becoming more material as their civilization developed. Blavatsky's Lemuria was located in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. It was a place of spiritual evolution rather than technological advancement. The Lemurians were meant to develop the physical form that would later allow humanity to achieve its destiny. Eventually, Lemuria was destroyed in cataclysms, sinking beneath the waves. Some Lemurians survived and evolved into the 4th root race, the Atlanteans. After Atlantis too was destroyed, the 5th root race, our own, began its journey. This esoteric history became influential in New Age and occult circles. Lemuria was blended and sometimes conflated with other lost lands, including Mu. Both were said to be in the Pacific. Both were destroyed by cataclysm. Both supposedly preceded the recorded history of human civilization. Churchward himself tried to distinguish Mu from Lemuria, insisting they were different places, but in popular imagination the two lands merged into a single myth. A lost Pacific paradise, home to an ancient and spiritually advanced civilization, destroyed by natural disaster, leaving only fragments of its wisdom in the teachings of later cultures. The confusion is understandable. The human imagination seems drawn to stories of lost golden ages. Nearly every culture has myths of a time when life was easier, when people were wiser, when humanity lived in greater harmony with nature and the divine. The fall from Eden, the end of the Golden Age, the Great Flood. These stories appear in endless variations. Lost continents like Mu and Lemuria tap into this archetypal pattern. They give concrete form to the vague feeling that we have lost something important, that our ancestors knew something we have forgotten. They suggest that beneath the surface of mundane reality lies a deeper truth, a hidden history, a secret knowledge waiting to be rediscovered. As you rest, feeling your body growing heavier and more relaxed, you might notice how soothing these stories are. They provide mystery without threat. They suggest lost wonders without demanding anything from you. You can imagine them like dreams, neither true nor false, simply possibilities floating in the vast space of imagination. Part 7. The Geology of Sinking Continents. What does modern geology tell us about the possibility of a continent like Mu existing in the Pacific? In short, the geological evidence argues strongly against it. The floor of the Pacific Ocean has been extensively mapped and studied. We understand its structure in detail. There is no evidence of a sunken continent. The Pacific Ocean floor is quite different from continental crust. Continental crust is relatively light and thick, composed primarily of granitic rocks. It is buoyant, floating on the denser mantle material beneath. Oceanic crust, by contrast, is thin and dense, made mostly of basaltic rock. It is constantly being created at mid-ocean ridges, where tectonic plates spread apart and new material wells up from below, and it is destroyed at subduction zones, where oceanic plates dive beneath continental plates and are reabsorbed into the mantle. This process, called seafloor spreading, was discovered in the 1960s and revolutionized geology. It explained continental drift and gave us the theory of plate tectonics, which describes the Earth's outer shell as divided into large plates that move relative to each other. The Pacific ocean floor is dominated by oceanic crust. There are no large areas of sunken continental material. The islands that dot the Pacific are volcanic in origin, formed by hotspots in the mantle, or by volcanic activity at plate boundaries. Places like Hawaii and the Polynesian Islands are the tips of enormous undersea volcanoes, not the mountain peaks of a submerged continent. Could a continent have sunk so completely that no trace remains? From a geological perspective, this is essentially impossible. Continental crust doesn't sink, it is too buoyant. When continents collide, they crumple upward, forming mountain ranges like the Himalayas. They don't submerge. There are instances of land being lost to the sea, but these involve relatively small areas and specific mechanisms. For example, at the end of the last ice age, as glaciers melted and sea levels rose by about 400 feet, many coastal areas were flooded. The land bridge that once connected Asia and North America was submerged, creating the Bering Strait. The North Sea, which is relatively shallow, was once partially above water, and people lived in areas that are now beneath the waves. These sunken lands have left traces, artifacts on the seafloor, submerged forests, the remains of human habitation. When archaeologists search in the right places, they find evidence of the lands that were lost. But these are flooded coastlines and shallow seas, not vanished continents, and they sank gradually over thousands of years as ice melted, not in a single catastrophic event. For a Pacific continent the size of Mu, as described by Churchward, to sink would require mechanisms unknown to geology. It would leave unmistakable evidence in the structure of the ocean floor. No such evidence exists. This doesn't mean that every island that exists today was always above water, or that no lands were lost. It does mean that a large continent spanning the Pacific within the time frame of human civilization is not supported by what we know about how the Earth works. Some proponents of lost continents have suggested that our geological theories are wrong, that there are forces or processes we don't understand, but geology is tested constantly against observation. The theory of plate tectonics makes predictions that are confirmed by measurements. GPS satellites can detect the motion of continents, moving at speeds of inches per year, just as the theory predicts. Earthquakes and volcanoes occur where plate boundaries are mapped, not randomly. The age of rocks can be measured and matches the patterns expected from seafloor spreading. In short, we would have to discard an enormous body of well-tested knowledge to make room for a sunken Pacific continent. The evidence would need to be extraordinary to justify such a revision, and that evidence simply isn't there. But as you sink deeper towards sleep, perhaps it doesn't matter whether Mu existed in physical reality. Stories have their own kind of reality. They shape how we see the world, how we imagine possibility, how we connect with the past. A myth doesn't need to be factual to be meaningful. Let the geological facts drift away like sand through your fingers. What remains is the dream, the vision, the idea of lost wonder, and that at least is undeniably real. Part 8. Cultural connections across the Pacific. While geology argues against a lost continent, the cultural connections across the Pacific remain intriguing. How do we explain the similarities observed between widely separated peoples? The answer lies in migration, trade, and the extraordinary seafaring abilities of ancient Pacific peoples. Over thousands of years, beginning perhaps as early as 3,500 years ago, people from Southeast Asia began expanding eastward into the Pacific. This expansion, known as the Austronesian Migration, is one of the great chapters in human history. These seafarers developed sophisticated canoes capable of long ocean voyages. They brought with them pigs, chickens, dogs and plants, including taro, breadfruit and sweet potatoes. They established settlements on island after island, eventually reaching Hawaii in the north, Easter Island in the east, and New Zealand in the south. This triangle represents the Polynesian expansion, a subset of the broader Austronesian movement. The voyages involved were staggering. From Tahiti to Hawaii is about 2,500 miles of open ocean. The journey to Easter Island was even longer. These weren't accidental drifting voyages. They were intentional expeditions with families and supplies aimed at finding and settling new lands. How did they know the islands were there? In some cases, they may have seen birds flying from the feeding grounds at sea back toward distant islands. In other cases, they may have observed clouds or the colour of the sky that indicated land beyond the horizon. And in many cases, they simply set out to explore, finding islands by systematic searching. Once an island was discovered, navigators would memorise the star path to it, the bearing by which one sailed, using the rising and setting points of stars as guides. Future voyagers could follow these remembered paths. Some islands maintained contact with their homelands for generations. Others became isolated, developing unique cultures over centuries. This explains why Pacific Island cultures share common elements. They descend from common ancestors who brought shared traditions, languages, and technologies. The similarities don't require a vanished continent, just remarkable navigational skills and the human impulse to explore. There are anomalies and mysteries, to be sure. The presence of sweet potatoes in Polynesia is interesting because sweet potatoes originated in South America. Did Polynesians voyage all the way to the Americas? Did South Americans somehow reach Polynesian islands? Or were sweet potatoes brought by early European explorers earlier than previously thought? The question remains debated, but it indicates that trans-Pacific contact was possible even if not common. Easter Island's Rongorongo script is another puzzle. These wooden tablets, incised with symbols, appear to represent some form of writing, though no one has successfully deciphered them. Were they a true writing system or a memory aid? How did an isolated island develop written communication? Some have suggested outside influence, perhaps from South America, or from a now-lost culture. But it's also possible that the Rapa Nui invented their script independently, joining the small list of cultures that developed writing without outside inspiration. These mysteries don't require supernatural explanations or lost continents, but they do remind us that ancient peoples were capable of far more than we sometimes credit them with. They crossed oceans, built monuments, developed complex societies, and adapted to challenging environments. Their achievements stand on their own merits. As you breathe slowly and evenly, imagine those ancient navigators. Imagine the courage it took to sail beyond sight of land, trusting in your knowledge of stars and swells. Imagine the thrill of seeing a new island rise above the horizon, green and welcoming after weeks at sea. Imagine making a home in a place no human had ever lived before, far from any help, dependent entirely on your skills and the resources you brought with you. These real human stories are at least as inspiring as any legend of a lost continent, perhaps more so, because they actually happened. Part 9. Catastrophism and the Flood Myths. One of the most compelling arguments for lost lands like Mu has always been the prevalence of flood myths across human cultures. Nearly every civilization has stories of a great deluge that destroyed the world, with only a few survivors escaping to rebuild. The biblical story of Noah's Ark is perhaps the most famous in Western culture, but it is far from unique. The ancient Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh includes a flood story remarkably similar to the biblical account. Hindu scriptures describe how Manu, warned by a divine fish, builds a boat to survive a catastrophic flood. Greek mythology tells of Deucalion and Pyrrha, who survive Zeus's flood sent to destroy corrupt humanity. Native American tribes, Chinese traditions, Australian Aboriginal stories all include their versions of a world-destroying deluge. Why are these stories so common? Supporters of lost continents argue that they are cultural memories of real catastrophes that destroyed advanced civilizations. The flood stories, they suggest, remember the sinking of lands like Mu or Atlantis. Mainstream scholars offer different explanations. Floods are among the most common and devastating natural disasters that ancient peoples experienced. River civilizations like those along the Tigris and Euphrates, the Nile, the Indus, and the Yellow River were periodically subject to catastrophic flooding. A major flood would destroy crops, homes, and lives. To people whose world might extend only a few dozen miles in any direction, a regional flood could seem like the end of the world. The archetypal pattern of destruction and renewal, death and rebirth, is fundamental to human psychology. Flood myths may express this pattern in narrative form, using the most devastating natural disaster most people knew to symbolize cosmic renewal. There is also the matter of rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age. As mentioned earlier, sea levels rose dramatically between about 15,000 and 7,000 years ago. Coastal settlements would have been gradually inundated. Over generations and centuries, people would have had to move inland multiple times as the sea advanced. This long-term process might have been remembered and condensed into stories of sudden catastrophic floods. Some researchers have suggested that specific events may have inspired some flood myths. For example, around 7,500 years ago, the Black Sea, which had been a freshwater lake, was suddenly flooded by seawater from the Mediterranean when rising sea levels breached the narrow strait. This would have rapidly inundated low-lying areas around the lake's shore. People living there would have had to flee. The story might have been preserved in the oral traditions that eventually influenced Mesopotamian and biblical accounts. So flood myths can be explained without requiring lost continents. They reflect real experiences of flooding, the psychological power of the destruction-renewal pattern, and possible folk memories of gradual sea level rise or specific catastrophic events. That said, the question of catastrophism in Earth's history is legitimate. For a long time, geology emphasized uniformitarianism, the idea that the processes shaping the Earth work slowly and gradually over immense periods. Mountains rise grain by grain, canyons are cut drop by drop. This view was important in establishing geology as a science and in understanding the Earth's great age. But we now know that Earth's history also includes catastrophic events, asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions, sudden climate shifts. The extinction of the dinosaurs 66 million years ago was caused by an asteroid strike. Massive volcanic events have triggered climate changes and mass extinctions. During the ice ages, vast lakes dammed by glaciers would sometimes breach catastrophically, releasing floods of biblical proportions, so catastrophes happen. The question is whether any such catastrophe within human history could have destroyed an advanced civilization like Mu, leaving so little trace that we cannot find it. The geological evidence suggests not, but the emotional and psychological appeal of the idea remains powerful. There is something comforting about believing that our current civilization is not the first, that before us, others rose and fell. It suggests that if we fail, others will come after us. It implies that the story of consciousness and culture is larger than any single civilization. Let these thoughts dissolve now like mist over water. Catastrophes and continuities, lost lands and enduring oceans, all blending together as you drift closer to sleep. The rhythm of your breathing is like the rhythm of waves, eternal, peaceful, inevitable. Part 10. The Mystery of Nan Madol. Among the real Pacific mysteries that have fueled speculation about lost civilizations is Nan Madol, an archaeological site in Micronesia. Located on the island of Pohnpei, Nan Madol is sometimes called the Venice of the Pacific. It consists of nearly 100 artificial islets, built on a coral reef platform connected by canals. The islets are constructed from massive basalt columns and boulders, stacked log cabin style to create walls, foundations and structures. The site covers about 200 acres and would have been a ceremonial and political centre, possibly housing the rulers and priests of a chiefdom that dominated the region. The construction is estimated to have taken place between 1100 and 1500 CE, though the settlement may have deeper roots. What makes Nan Madol remarkable is the sheer labour involved in its construction. The basalt used in building was quarried from elsewhere on the island and transported somehow to the reef site. Some individual stones weigh as much as 50 tons. Moving them without modern equipment, without wheeled vehicles or metal tools, across water to the construction site, and then stacking them to create walls and buildings, represents a massive organisational and engineering achievement. The sight of these massive stone structures, partially ruined and overgrown with vegetation, rising from the reef in the middle of the ocean, has inspired speculation. Some have claimed Nan Madol is evidence of a lost civilization with advanced technology. Others have suggested it is a remnant of Lemuria or Mu. Archaeological investigation tells a more grounded but still impressive story. The people who built Nan Madol were the ancestors of the modern Pohnpeians. They were skilled stoneworkers and engineers. They likely transported the basalt on rafts at high tide, floating them over the reef to the construction site. The work would have taken generations and required the coordinated labour of thousands of people. Why build in such an elaborate and difficult manner? The answer seems to be a combination of practical and symbolic factors. The islet city was defensible, protected by the surrounding reef and canals. It was also impressive, a statement of power and prestige. The rulers who commissioned Nan Madol were demonstrating their ability to command labour and resources. The site was not just functional but ceremonial, a sacred landscape where earthly power intersected with spiritual forces. Nan Madol is not unique in being a mysterious ancient site. Around the world we find monuments and structures that seem to exceed the capabilities we expect from ancient peoples. Stonehenge, the pyramids, Angkor Wat, Machu Picchu, all provoke wonder and questions about how they were achieved. The answer, consistently, is that ancient peoples were smarter and more capable than we give them credit for. They had time, patience, social organisation, and deep knowledge of practical engineering even without formal science. They could accomplish astonishing things with simple tools if they were determined and organised. The temptation to invoke lost civilizations or ancient astronauts usually says more about our own assumptions than about the past. We underestimate what humans can do without modern technology, and then, when confronted with evidence of ancient achievements, we assume they must have had help from some more advanced source. This attitude is, perhaps unconsciously, condescending to our ancestors. It suggests they needed outside intervention to achieve greatness. The truth is more respectful and more inspiring. They did it themselves. Nan Madol stands as a testament to human capability. It doesn't need to be a remnant of Mu to be remarkable. Its actual history, its construction by a complex chiefdom using locally developed techniques is impressive enough. As your consciousness grows dim and dreamy, picture those stone structures. Water lapping at their bases, moonlight casting shadows between the blocks, fish swimming through submerged passages. The sense of mystery doesn't require a fantastical explanation. The mystery is in the human story itself. Why we build, why we create monuments, why we pour our labour into structures that will outlast us. These questions touch something deep in what it means to be human. Part 11. Spiritual Seekers and Alternative Histories. The story of Mu is not just about archaeology and geology. It is also about the human need for alternative narratives, especially spiritual ones. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Western culture was in flux. Traditional religious authority was being questioned. Science was revealing a universe far older and stranger than biblical literalism allowed. Industrialization was transforming society, bringing wealth and dislocation in equal measure. Millions had died in World War I, shattering optimism about progress. Into this unsettled landscape came various spiritual movements seeking to reconcile ancient wisdom with modern knowledge, or to bypass materialism entirely in favour of esoteric truths. Theosophy, founded by Helena Blavatsky, was one of the most influential. It proposed that all religions share a common esoteric core, that humanity evolves spiritually across incarnations and ages, and that there are advanced spiritual beings guiding human development. Blavatsky claimed to channel ancient masters and to have access to secret teachings preserved from prehistoric times. For theosophists and similar seekers, lost continents like Lemuria and Mu were not just geographical locations but spiritual realities. They represented stages in humanity's spiritual evolution. The people of these ancient lands had not been more technologically advanced but more spiritually developed. They had possessed direct knowledge of cosmic truths that later, more materialistic civilizations had lost. The destruction of these lands was not merely geological catastrophe, but karmic consequence. Civilizations fell when they deviated from spiritual principles, when they became too materialistic or misused their powers. The fall of Atlantis in particular was often described as a moral lesson about the dangers of spiritual corruption. This framing gave lost continents a different kind of meaning. They became part of a spiritual narrative about humanity's journey. We had fallen from grace, lost our direct connection to the divine, but we could reclaim it through spiritual practice and esoteric knowledge. This narrative appealed to many seekers. It suggested that mainstream religion and science didn't have all the answers. It implied that by studying ancient mysteries and following esoteric teachings, individuals could access truths that conventional society had forgotten or suppressed. Churchward's books on Mu fit perfectly into this milieu. His descriptions of Mian religious teachings, with their emphasis on a supreme creative force, the immortality of the soul, and the unity of all religions, aligned with theosophical and New Thought ideas popular at the time. Mu became part of a larger alternative history that included Atlantis, ancient astronauts, hidden masters in Tibet, and secret wisdom encoded in ancient monuments. This alternative history continues to appeal to spiritual seekers today. New Age bookstores are filled with volumes about lost civilizations, ancient aliens, crystal skulls, and hidden knowledge. Documentaries and websites explore these themes, often mixing genuine archaeological mysteries with speculative interpretation and outright fabrication. Why does this alternative history persist despite lack of scientific support? Perhaps because it serves psychological and spiritual needs that conventional narratives don't address. For one thing, it provides a sense of wonder and mystery. Modern scientific accounts of human history, while fascinating to those who study them in depth, can seem dry and reductionist in popular presentation. We evolved from apes, developed agriculture, built civilizations, developed technology. It's a story of gradual progress punctuated by setbacks. There's truth in it, but not much magic. Alternative histories offer magic. They suggest that reality is more mysterious than we've been told, that there are secrets waiting to be discovered, that the world is larger and stranger than conventional science admits. For people who feel that life has become too mundane, too mechanistic, too disenchanted, this is powerfully appealing. Alternative histories also provide a critique of modernity. By suggesting that ancient peoples possessed wisdom we've lost, they imply that our current path is not the only possibility. They invite us to question whether technological progress equals real advancement. They suggest that we might learn from the past rather than simply moving away from it. There's something valuable in that impulse, even if the specific claims about Mu or Atlantis don't hold up. Indigenous peoples around the world do possess knowledge that Western science is only beginning to appreciate. Sustainable land management practices, medicinal plants, understanding of local ecosystems. Much of this knowledge has been dismissed or destroyed by colonization and modernization. The desire to recover lost wisdom is not entirely misguided. The problem comes when speculation is presented as fact, when lack of evidence is spun into conspiracy theories about suppression by mainstream academics, when the genuine achievements of ancient peoples are overshadowed by claims of supernatural or extraterrestrial intervention. Ancient peoples were remarkable. They didn't need to be Lemurians or Mayans to be worthy of our respect and study. The Polynesians navigating by stars, the Maya developing sophisticated calendars, the builders of Great Zimbabwe or the Indus Valley cities, these people were our ancestors, and their actual accomplishments are astonishing. But in the realm of dreams and stories, perhaps the distinction between fact and fiction matters less. As you drift towards sleep, the historical Mu and the imagined Mu blend together. Both are part of the human story, the story of where we've been and the stories we tell about where we've been. Both reveal something about who we are. Part 12. The Architecture of Dreams. Let us return to the vision of Mu itself, not as history or pseudo-history, but as imaginative construction, a palace built of dream logic and longing. Picture the capital city of Mu, sometimes called Hieratic, rising on a broad plain near the coast. In Churchward's telling, it was a city of 300,000 souls, the political and religious centre of the entire continent. The architecture was grand and geometric. Buildings were constructed of stone, faced with precious metals that gleamed in the tropical sun. Streets were laid out in orderly patterns, wide and clean, lined with gardens. Public fountains provided fresh water. Temples dominated the skyline, stepped pyramids rising toward the heavens, their summit platforms adorned with astronomical instruments and altars. The largest temple was dedicated to Ra, the sun god, whom the Muyans worshipped as the source of all life and light. Other temples honoured the forces of nature, the sea, the earth, the growing things, the storms. The priesthood maintained these temples, conducting rituals and observations, keeping calendars, predicting eclipses, and interpreting omens. The palace of the king stood at the city's heart, a vast complex of courtyards and halls. Here the ruler held audience, dispensed justice, and hosted ceremonies that united the political and spiritual dimensions of Muyan life. The king was not a god himself, but a divine representative, responsible for maintaining cosmic order through proper ritual and righteous governance. Beyond the capital, the continent of Mu was dotted with other cities and towns, each with its own character and specialties. Coastal cities engaged in trade, their harbours filled with ships that sailed to distant islands and perhaps to the Americas. Agricultural regions produced abundant crops, fruits, grains, vegetables thriving in the rich volcanic soil. Mountain regions were home to miners extracting precious stones and metals. The people themselves, as Churchward described them, were diverse in appearance, representing different tribes or nations within the Muyan civilization. Some were fair-skinned, others dark, some tall, others shorter and more compact. But all shared the common culture and language of Mu, and all participated in the religious and social systems that bound the continent together. Daily life in Mu, in this imagined reconstruction, was peaceful and prosperous. The climate was gentle, the land abundant. People worked, but not oppressively. They had leisure for art, music, and contemplation. Education was valued, with children learning not only practical skills but also philosophy, astronomy, and spiritual teachings. The Muyans understood themselves as living in harmony with cosmic principles. They believed that the universe was conscious, that spirit preceded and created matter, that all souls were on a journey of development across many lifetimes. Death was not an ending, but a transition. The body was a temporary vehicle for the immortal soul. This worldview shaped Muyan ethics and social organisation. Since all souls were on the same fundamental journey, all people deserved respect and compassion. Wealth and power were not to be hoarded but shared. Leaders were stewards, not tyrants. Justice was restorative rather than purely punitive. Of course, this idealized vision has no historical basis. It is a utopian fantasy, projecting modern spiritual values onto an imaginary ancient civilization. But as a dream, as an imaginative exercise, it reveals what people wish for, a society at peace with itself and nature, where material abundance and spiritual wisdom coexist, where people are guided by higher principles rather than greed and fear. The appeal of Mu is partly the appeal of all utopias. It represents what we hope humans could be if circumstances were right and wisdom prevailed. It's a vision of harmony that contrasts with the conflicts and anxieties of our actual world. As you rest, half asleep now, let yourself wander through this dream city. Imagine walking down those wide avenues, the sun warm on your face, the scent of flowers in the air. You hear music from a nearby courtyard, someone playing a flute, the melody rising and falling like breath. Children run past laughing. An elder sits in the shade reading from a scroll. Above on the temple platform a priest observes the sun's position, making marks on a calendar stone. Everything is peaceful. Everything is as it should be. You feel safe here, in this place that never existed, this sanctuary built only of words and wishes, and perhaps that's enough. Perhaps the dream itself, the ability to imagine better worlds, is one of humanity's most important capacities. Part 13. The Catastrophe. But paradise, even in imagination, cannot last forever. Every golden age contains the seeds of its own ending, and so we come to the destruction of Mu. According to Churchward, Mu's end came suddenly and catastrophically around 12,000 years ago. The mechanism, he claimed, was the collapse of vast underground chambers beneath the continent. The Earth's crust, in this telling, was riddled with pockets filled with gases. These underground chambers supported the land above, but when certain chambers collapsed, the ground above them sank. If enough chambers failed, an entire continent could break apart and submerge. Churchward described the final days of Mu with apocalyptic drama. First came earthquakes, growing in frequency and intensity. Buildings cracked and fell. People fled their homes in terror. The priesthood consulted the ancient texts, seeking to understand what was happening and whether anything could be done to avert disaster. Then came the fires. Volcanoes that had slept for centuries roared to life. Lava poured down mountainsides. Ash darkened the sky. The air itself seemed to burn, so hot and thick with smoke that breathing became difficult. And finally the land began to sink. Not slowly, over years, but within a single day and night. The sea rushed in, swallowing cities, fields, forests, mountains. People scrambled for high ground, but there was nowhere safe to flee. Ships were dashed to pieces by enormous waves. Those who managed to find floating debris watched in horror as everything they had known disappeared beneath the churning water. By the time the sun rose again, Mu was gone. Only a few mountain peaks remained above water, becoming the islands scattered across the Pacific. Of the 64 million people who had lived on the continent, only a few thousand survived. Those who happened to be on the highest ground, or who managed to reach ships and sail away before being overwhelmed. These survivors scattered across the globe, carrying with them fragments of Mayan knowledge and culture. Some reached the Americas, where they influenced or founded the civilizations that would later rise there. Others made their way to Asia, contributing to the cultures developing in India and China. Still others remained on the Pacific Islands, preserving what they could of their lost homeland's traditions. This dramatic narrative clearly echoes the Atlantis story from Plato's dialogues. Atlantis, too, was destroyed in a day and a night, sinking beneath the waves due to earthquakes and floods. The parallels are no accident. Churchward was consciously creating a Pacific equivalent to the Atlantic's famous lost land. From a scientific standpoint, the scenario is impossible. As discussed earlier, continents don't sink. The mechanism of collapsing gas chambers is not consistent with what we know about geology, and there is no evidence in the Pacific Ocean floor of any such catastrophe. But as myth, as story, the destruction of Mu serves important psychological functions. It provides a warning about the fragility of civilization, the importance of respecting natural forces, the danger of hubris. It reminds us that even the greatest human achievements can be swept away by disaster. It also creates pathos and tragedy. The loss of Mu is not just the loss of a place, but the loss of knowledge, beauty, wisdom. It represents what humanity is capable of achieving and what we are capable of losing. The story invites us to mourn not just for Mu, but for all that humans have lost over the millennia. Languages that died with their last speakers, libraries burned, knowledge forgotten, skills lost. In this sense, the myth of Mu, though not historically true, is emotionally true. It acknowledges the real losses that time inflicts and the real fragility of human culture. Imagine those final moments, the ground heaving beneath your feet, the roar of breaking earth and rushing water, knowing that everything you love is about to be destroyed and there is nothing you can do to stop it. In those moments, what would matter? What would you try to save? Perhaps the survivors, clinging to wreckage as the ocean swallowed their world, asked themselves these questions. What must be preserved? What knowledge must be carried forward? What stories must be told so that future generations will know what was lost and honour those who perished? Let these images fade now, dissolving back into the darkness behind your eyes. The catastrophe is over. The waters have stilled. What was lost is lost. What remains is memory, story, dream. Part 14. The Survivors and the Spreading of Knowledge. In Churchward's narrative, the survivors of Mu's destruction became the founders and teachers of later civilizations. This claim attempts to explain the similarities between ancient cultures that developed in widely separated parts of the world. Consider the pyramids. Egypt's pyramids are world famous, massive stone monuments built as tombs for pharaohs, but pyramidal structures appear elsewhere too. Mesopotamia had ziggurats, stepped pyramids serving as temples. Mesoamerica boasts numerous pyramids, built by the Maya, Aztec and earlier cultures. Even in Asia, pyramid-like structures can be found. Why this common form? Supporters of lost civilizations argue that refugees from Mu or Atlantis brought pyramid-building knowledge with them, spreading it to the various lands where they settled. This explains the similarity without requiring independent invention. Mainstream archaeology offers a simpler explanation. A pyramid or stepped mound is a logical structure to build if you want to create something tall and monumental with stone. It's stable, with a wide base supporting successively smaller levels. Cultures around the world independently discovered that piling stones in this fashion was an effective way to create impressive structures. Moreover, when we examine the pyramids closely, they're quite different from each other. Egyptian pyramids have smooth sides, are built of limestone blocks, contain internal chambers, and served as tombs. Mesoamerican pyramids typically have stepped sides, contain little or no internal space, are often built around earlier structures, and served as temple platforms. Ziggurats were solid throughout, accessed by external staircases. These differences suggest independent development rather than a common source. The same applies to other supposed similarities. Many cultures developed writing, but their scripts are different, representing different approaches to encoding language. Many cultures practiced astronomy, but their systems for dividing the sky and tracking celestial motions varied. Many cultures built cities, but their urban plans, construction techniques, and social organizations were distinct. When we look closely, the similarities are often superficial, while the differences are profound. This pattern suggests parallel development, with humans in different places solving similar problems in similar but not identical ways. Nevertheless, the idea that ancient cultures were connected by travellers from a lost civilization remains emotionally appealing. It implies a unity to human history, a sense that we're all part of one story rather than multiple separate stories that happen to unfold on the same planet. In Churchward's telling, the Mian survivors who reached different lands brought more than technical knowledge. They brought spiritual teachings, ethical principles, and an understanding of cosmic laws. They became the wise ancestors, the culture heroes, the mysterious teachers who appear in many traditions. The Egyptian god Thoth, the Greek Hermes, the Mesopotamian Oans, the Central American Quetzalcoatl. These figures are often described as bringers of civilization, teachers who instructed primitive peoples in agriculture, writing, law, and religion. Some theorists have suggested these were actually Muyan survivors, remembered in myth as gods or divine beings. This interpretation transforms the survivors from refugees into saviors, from victims of catastrophe into heroes who preserved wisdom and shared it with less developed peoples. It's a romantic notion, casting the story in terms of noble sacrifice and the transmission of sacred knowledge. The reality, as archaeology reveals it, is simultaneously less dramatic and more interesting. Civilizations developed through the accumulated efforts of countless people over many generations. Agriculture wasn't given by a teacher god, but discovered through patient observation and experimentation. Writing wasn't revealed, but invented, probably multiple times in different places. Cities weren't planned by external architects, but grew organically as communities enlarged and social complexity increased. The real story of human cultural development is one of gradual accumulation, occasional breakthrough insights, cultural diffusion through trade and contact, and local adaptation to specific environments. It's less tidy than the lost civilization narrative, but it has the virtue of being supported by evidence, and it's inspiring in its own way. It means that human progress is genuinely our achievement, not something handed down from above. It means that ordinary people, not just legendary heroes, created the civilizations we inherit. It democratizes the story, making all of us participants in the ongoing project of human culture. As you breathe slowly, in and out, consider the real survivors, the real ancestors. Not legendary Muyans, but actual humans who lived through actual disasters, who fled from floods and droughts and wars, who carried their children and their seeds and their stories to new lands, who started over and built again. Their names are lost, but their legacy is everywhere. You are here because they survived. Part 15. Maps and Evidence. One of the intriguing elements in the Mu story involves ancient maps that supposedly show lands no longer existing. These maps have been cited as evidence of lost continents and ancient advanced civilizations. The most famous is probably the Piri Reis map of 1513. This map, created by Ottoman Admiral Piri Reis, shows the Atlantic Ocean with parts of the Americas, and, intriguingly, what some interpret as Antarctica. The controversial claim is that Antarctica is shown without ice, as it would have appeared millions of years ago, or at least before it was covered by glaciers. If true, this would suggest that whoever provided the source information for the map had either explored Antarctica in ancient times when it was ice-free, or possessed ancient maps showing it in that state. This has been linked to Atlantis, Mu, and various theories about lost civilizations. However, cartographic experts who have studied the Piri Reis map offer less sensational interpretations. The supposed Antarctica is more likely a speculative or distorted representation of South America's southern coast. Medieval and Renaissance mapmakers often drew coastlines based on incomplete information, producing maps that mixed accurate details with imaginative speculation. Piri Reis himself noted on the map that he had compiled it from about 20 earlier maps, including one supposedly based on maps from the time of Alexander the Great. Errors, distortions, and speculative additions would accumulate through such a process of copying and compilation. Other maps cited in support of lost continents include various medieval world maps that show islands or lands in the Pacific or Atlantic that don't correspond to known geography. But these too are best explained as cartographic speculation. Before the age of exploration definitively charted the world's oceans, mapmakers often added hypothetical lands based on travellers' tales, classical authorities, or pure imagination. The Renaissance era inherited geographical ideas from ancient Greek and Roman writers, who speculated about unknown southern continents to balance the northern landmasses. These theoretical lands appeared on maps not because anyone had seen them, but because they seemed logically necessary according to the geographical theories of the time. When actual exploration disproved the existence of these lands, they disappeared from maps. But before then, they had a cartographic reality, appearing on map after map copied from earlier maps, gaining a kind of false authority through repetition. Some proponents of lost civilizations have also pointed to anomalies in ancient maps, such as depictions of lands with seemingly accurate longitude measurements before the invention of the chronometer, which was necessary for determining longitude at sea. However, these accuracies are often exaggerated, and the maps contain plenty of inaccuracies as well. Cherry-picking the details that seem impressive while ignoring the errors creates a misleading picture. The human desire to find evidence for desired conclusions is powerful. If you believe in lost continents, you'll tend to interpret ambiguous cartographic evidence in ways that support that belief. If you approach the same maps with skepticism, you'll see the errors and speculations that better explain their peculiarities. This pattern appears throughout the study of claimed evidence for Mu and similar lost lands. Ambiguous archaeological finds are interpreted as out-of-place artifacts proving advanced ancient technology. Myths and legends are read as coded histories. Linguistic similarities are exaggerated while differences are minimized. Geological features are misidentified as artificial structures. None of this is necessarily dishonest. Confirmation bias affects everyone. We all tend to notice and remember evidence that supports our existing beliefs while discounting evidence against them. It takes conscious effort and systematic methodology to overcome this tendency. Science has developed such methodologies precisely because human intuition is so easily misled. The question is not whether mistakes happen in interpretation, but whether we're willing to revise our beliefs when better evidence and analysis become available. The history of Mu is a history of claims that haven't revised themselves in light of contrary evidence, because the belief is sustained by factors other than evidence: emotional appeal, spiritual meaning, narrative satisfaction. As you sink deeper into rest, the question of evidence drifts away. In dreams, we don't demand proof. We accept the reality of the dream world while we're in it. Flying is possible, the dead walk. Impossible architectures stand solid. Only upon waking do we judge the dream against the standards of waking reality. Perhaps the story of Mu exists in that dream space, neither true nor false, but meaningful in the way dreams are meaningful, revealing wishes and fears and the shapes of our imagination. Part 16. Modern Mu. While Churchward's books were most popular in the early to mid-20th century, interest in Mu and similar lost continents hasn't disappeared. The themes resurface regularly in New Age literature, alternative history documentaries, and online communities dedicated to ancient mysteries. Modern versions of the Mu story sometimes incorporate new elements. Some link it to UFOs and ancient astronauts, suggesting that the advanced technology of Mu came from extraterrestrial visitors. Others connect it to theories about prehistoric nuclear wars, claiming that ancient civilizations destroyed themselves with advanced weapons, leaving radioactive ruins. These elaborations move even further from evidence than Churchward's original claims. They stack speculation on top of speculation, building ever more elaborate structures of unsupported assertion. Yet they persist, and in some corners of the internet thrive. Why? Part of the answer lies in the democratization of publishing and discourse. Before the internet, publishing a book or appearing on television required institutional gatekeeping. editors, publishers, and producers made decisions about what reached audiences. This system had many flaws, including bias and exclusion, but it did provide some filtering of clearly unsupported claims. The internet allows anyone to publish anything. This freedom is valuable in many ways, giving voice to perspectives that traditional media might ignore. But it also means that misinformation, speculation, and outright fabrication spread without effective challenge. Moreover, algorithmic recommendation systems often promote controversial or sensational content because it generates engagement. A video making extraordinary claims about lost civilizations may receive more views, likes, and shares than a careful archaeological lecture. The incentive structure favours the dramatic over the accurate. In this environment, the Moo story finds new life. Each retelling adds new details, new supposed evidence, new connections to other alternative theories. The story becomes part of a larger alternative narrative about human history, one that rejects mainstream scholarship as limited, biased, or deliberately suppressing the truth. This rejection of expert consensus is concerning. While healthy skepticism and questioning of authority are valuable, wholesale dismissal of entire fields of knowledge is problematic. Archaeology, geology, linguistics, and history are not perfect, but they are systematic attempts to understand the past through evidence and rigorous analysis. Replacing them with speculation based on misinterpreted artifacts and unsourced ancient texts doesn't lead to better understanding. That said, mainstream academia could do better at communicating its findings and engaging with public curiosity about the past. When people feel that official sources are boring, inaccessible, or dismissive of their questions, they may turn to alternative sources that at least speak to their interest with enthusiasm. The real histories that archaeology uncovers are genuinely fascinating. The peopling of the Pacific, the development of agriculture, the rise of complex societies, the achievements of ancient engineers and artists. These stories are compelling and inspire wonder. They don't require embellishment with lost continents or ancient aliens. Perhaps what's needed is not more debunking but better storytelling. We need to tell the true stories of the past in ways that capture imagination and convey the remarkable nature of human history. We need to show that reality is stranger and more interesting than fiction, that the actual past is full of mysteries we're still unravelling. As your mind grows quieter, drifting in the space between waking and sleep, the distinction between true history and imagined history blurs. Stories are stories. Some correspond to evidence, others to wishes. Both kinds have shaped human culture. Both kinds reveal something about who we are. Maybe that's enough. Maybe we can appreciate the Mew story for what it is. A modern myth, a narrative that speaks to certain longings and anxieties, a dream of lost wisdom and catastrophic change. We can enjoy it as we enjoy any story, while still maintaining the distinction between story and history, between imagination and evidence. Part 17. The Ocean of Forgetting. There is something profound about the image of a lost land beneath the ocean. Water covers most of our planet's surface. The deep oceans remain less explored than the surface of Mars. There are mysteries there, certainly. Unknown species, geological features we've only recently discovered, wrecks of ships carrying their cargo of human stories down into the abyss. The ocean as a place of forgetting is an old metaphor. What the sea takes, the sea keeps. Sailors lost overboard, cities claimed by rising tides, lands submerged by geological change. The ocean erases them, folds them into darkness and pressure and silence. But the ocean also preserves. In the cold, dark deep, without oxygen, organic materials can last for centuries or millennia. Shipwrecks sit on the bottom largely intact. Time slowed in those depths. The ocean floor holds a record of Earth's history in layers of sediment, each layer a page in the book of time. So the ocean is both destroyer and preserver, both eraser and archive. It's fitting that lost lands like Mew are imagined to lie beneath its waves. The ocean becomes a metaphor for the past itself. Vast, deep, holding secrets, largely hidden from view, occasionally yielding up treasures or truths to those who search carefully. In your mind's eye, descend now beneath the surface. The light fades quickly as you sink deeper. Blues darken toward indigo, toward black. The water grows cold. Pressure increases, squeezing inward from all directions. Down here, in the abyssal plains, miles beneath the surface, the ocean floor stretches flat and featureless. Sediment, drifting down from above like snow, covers everything. Occasionally a rock outcrop or seamount rises from the plain. The landscape is alien, less familiar to humans than the surface of the moon. Imagine ruins here, not because they exist, but because the imagination demands them. Stone blocks arranged in patterns that suggest intention. Carvings worn smooth by currents but still hinting at faces, symbols, records. Corridors leading into darkness. Chambers where ancient objects rest, undisturbed for millennia. This is the dream of Mu. Knowledge waiting to be rediscovered. Wisdom preserved in hidden places. The possibility that we might recover what was lost and learn from it. But the ocean keeps its secrets. The ruins remain imaginary. What lies on the actual ocean floor is real but different. Volcanic rock, sediment, the bones of whales, the occasional wreck of a ship that went down in recorded history. The past we can recover through archaeology and science is fragmentary but real. We find tools and pottery shards, foundations of buildings, bones and seeds, pollen preserved in lake sediments, ice cores holding bubbles of ancient atmosphere. From these fragments, we reconstruct as much as we can of how people lived, what they knew, what they believed, how they changed over time. There are gaps, certainly. Much has been lost. But what remains is enough to tell remarkable stories, true stories of human journey and achievement. Perhaps the lesson is to value what we have rather than lamenting what might have been lost. The civilization we possess, with all its flaws and all its wonders, is the one we need to understand and preserve and carry forward. The ocean of forgetting is also the ocean of possibility. Each generation forgets some things and learns others. Culture is not static but flowing, like water itself, always moving, always changing, carrying some things forward while letting others drift away. What will the future remember of our time? What will be lost? What will be found centuries from now by archaeologists sifting through our ruins? What stories will they tell about us? These questions can't be answered. We live in the present, the knife edge between past and future. What we leave behind will be interpreted by others according to their contexts and concerns. All we can do is try to preserve what seems valuable and create things worth preserving. Let these thoughts dissolve now. You're drifting in dark water, weightless, peaceful. There's no need to search for lost lands or recover ancient wisdom. Everything you need is here, in this moment, in the simple fact of consciousness, breath, existence. Part 18. Indigenous Voices. In discussing lost continents in the Pacific, we should acknowledge the perspectives of the indigenous peoples whose ancestors actually settled these islands and who still live there today. For Pacific Islanders, the ocean is not a barrier but a highway, not an emptiness, but a familiar landscape. Traditional navigators could read the sea and sky in ways that seem almost magical to those raised in landlocked technological societies. They could feel the shape of swells indicating islands beyond the horizon. They could navigate by the stars with precision rivaling GPS. They understood currents, wind patterns, bird behaviour, and cloud formations. This knowledge was not mystical or supernatural. It was empirical, learned through generations of observation and experience, passed down through apprenticeships where young navigators learned from masters. It was practical knowledge, tested constantly against real-world results. If your navigation skills weren't adequate, you died at sea. The survivors were those who truly understood the ocean. When outsiders encounter this level of knowledge encoded in oral tradition rather than written text, there's sometimes a tendency to assume it must have come from some external source, some advanced civilization that taught the primitives. This assumption is both condescending and wrong. Pacific Islander cultures developed their seafaring abilities themselves through their own intelligence and observation. They didn't need Mu or any other lost continent to explain their achievements. Similarly, when we look at monuments like the Easter Island Moai or the stone structures at Nan Madol, we should recognise them as achievements of the peoples who actually built them, not mysterious remnants of some other civilization. Indigenous oral traditions do include stories of lands that were lost or ancestors who came from elsewhere. These stories are part of the cultural history and deserve respect, but they should be understood in their own contexts, not appropriated to support theories about lost continents that serve Western esoteric agendas. The Mu narrative, despite being set in the Pacific, is essentially a Western creation. It was developed by Western writers, drawing on Western esoteric traditions, and it served Western psychological and spiritual needs. It had little to do with actual Pacific Islander cultures, beyond borrowing some surface elements and misinterpreting some traditions. In recent decades, there's been a revival of traditional Pacific Islander navigation and cultural practices. Projects like the Polynesian Voyaging Society's Canoe Hokulea have demonstrated that traditional navigation techniques really do work, sailing thousands of miles without instruments. These voyages have been powerful assertions of indigenous knowledge and capability, reclaiming a heritage that colonization had suppressed or dismissed. From this perspective, theories about lost continents can be seen as another form of erasure. They suggest that the impressive achievements of Pacific Island cultures must have come from some external source, rather than from the people themselves. They divert attention from the real remarkable story of how Pacific Islanders explored and settled their ocean world. The true story doesn't require a lost continent. It requires recognizing and respecting indigenous knowledge, acknowledging the sophistication of traditional technologies and practices, and understanding that different ways of knowing are not inferior to Western science, just different in their methods and expression. As you rest, breathing gently, imagine the ocean not as empty but as full, crisscrossed with remembered paths, alive with meaning. Imagine knowing the sea so well that you could find your way across thousands of miles of water with only the stars and swells to guide you. That knowledge is real, that capability is documented, and it belongs to the ancestors of people still living today. Part 19. The function of myth. Stepping back from questions of historical accuracy, what can we say about Mu as myth, as story, as cultural artifact? Myths serve multiple functions in human societies. They explain the origins of things, providing narrative accounts of how the world came to be as it is. They encode values and moral lessons, teaching through story what behaviour is admired or condemned. They create shared identity, giving communities common references and understanding. They address existential questions about meaning, mortality, and the nature of reality. The Mu myth touches on several of these functions. It provides an origin story, suggesting where human civilization came from and how it spread. It offers a moral lesson about the fragility of civilizations and the consequences of deviating from wisdom. It addresses existential questions about whether humanity is progressing or regressing, whether we're gaining or losing knowledge over time. In this sense, Mu functions like other creation and destruction myths found across cultures. It's not unique, but rather a variation on archetypal themes: paradise lost, the flood that destroys the world, the survivors who must start over, the wisdom that must be preserved and transmitted. These themes resonate because they touch on real human experiences. Civilizations do rise and fall. Knowledge is lost. Disasters happen. People must rebuild after catastrophes. The specific details of Mu may be invented, but the patterns it embodies are real. Joseph Campbell, the great scholar of comparative mythology, argued that myths operate on multiple levels. On the literal level, they are stories about events and beings, but they also function symbolically, representing psychological and spiritual truths. The journey of the hero in myth represents the journey of self-development that each person must undertake. The death and rebirth of gods represents the cycles of transformation in both nature and in consciousness. From this perspective, we might read the Mu myth symbolically rather than literally. Mu represents the state of wholeness or integration that humans sometimes achieve and then lose. Its advanced knowledge represents intuitive or spiritual understanding that is present in childhood or in contemplative states, but gets buried by rational egoic consciousness. The catastrophe represents the disruptions and losses that are inevitable parts of life. The survivors represent the part of us that endures and carries forward whatever can be saved. This symbolic reading doesn't require believing that Mu physically existed. Instead, it treats the story as a vehicle for expressing truths about the human condition. In this view, arguing about whether Mu was real misses the point. The question is not whether it existed, but what it means. This approach to myth is sophisticated and valuable. It allows us to appreciate stories for their psychological and spiritual content without requiring historical belief. We can learn from myths, find meaning in them, let them shape our imagination and values, while still maintaining a critical perspective on their factual claims. The danger comes when the symbolic and literal are confused, when myth is defended as history and evidence is rejected in favour of belief, then the myth becomes rigid, a dogma that closes off inquiry rather than opening up meaning. The healthiest approach may be to hold myths lightly, appreciating them for what they offer, while not insisting they must be factually true. We can enjoy the story of Mu, contemplate its themes, use it as a starting point for imagination and reflection, without needing to believe that a Pacific continent actually sank 12,000 years ago. Your breathing has slowed now, deepened. You're on the edge of sleep, where thoughts become fluid, where the boundary between real and imagined dissolves. This is the realm where myths live, where stories have their power. In this twilight consciousness, Mu can be as real as anything else, because the imagination is real, and its creations have their own kind of existence. Part 20. The search continues. Despite the geological evidence against sunken Pacific continents, the search for lost civilizations continues, and in some sense, this search has borne fruit, though not in the way enthusiasts of Mu might have hoped. Underwater archaeology has discovered numerous sites submerged by rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age. These aren't lost continents, but they are lost lands, coastal settlements that were inundated as glaciers melted and oceans rose. Off the coast of India, in the Gulf of Kambat, researchers have identified what may be the remains of an ancient settlement beneath the waves. Sonar imaging has revealed structures that some interpret as city walls and buildings. Artifacts recovered from the site have been dated to several thousand years ago, though the interpretation remains controversial. In the Mediterranean, entire ancient ports now lie underwater. The city of Pavlopetri off the coast of Greece is one of the oldest submerged cities ever found, dating back over 5,000 years. In the Black Sea, archaeologists have discovered remarkably well-preserved ancient shipwrecks in the oxygen-free depths, along with evidence of coastal settlements flooded when sea levels rose. The North Sea contains Doggerland, an area that was once above water, connecting Britain to continental Europe. During the last ice age, when sea levels were lower, Doggerland was a rich environment supporting both animal and human populations. As the ice melted, the area was gradually flooded. Fishing nets sometimes bring up ancient tools and bones from what was once dry land. These discoveries are scientifically fascinating. They push back our understanding of human settlement patterns. They reveal that coastal civilizations thrived in areas now lost to the sea. They show that rising waters did indeed swallow inhabited lands, lending some truth to the flood myths that are so common in human cultures. But these are flooded coastlines and shallow seas, not sunken continents. The mechanisms are understood. Glacial melting, raising sea levels, not catastrophic subsidence of continental crust. The timeframes are recent enough that we can find artifacts and remains, not so ancient that everything has been erased or buried under sediment. In the Pacific specifically, underwater archaeology has revealed ancient sites on islands and atolls, but nothing suggesting a lost continent. What has been found instead is evidence of the impressive maritime cultures that explored and settled the Pacific using sophisticated navigation techniques. The search for lost civilizations also continues on land. Archaeology regularly makes discoveries that revise our understanding of the past. New sites are found, new dating techniques reveal unexpected ages for known sites. New analysis of artifacts yields insights into ancient technologies and cultures. Recent discoveries have shown that complex societies developed earlier and in more places than previously thought. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, for instance, is a massive stone complex dated to over 11,000 years ago, created by people who were supposedly simple hunter-gatherers. The site challenges assumptions about when humans were capable of monumental architecture and organised religious activity. In the Amazon, aerial surveys using laser mapping technology have revealed extensive earthworks and settlements hidden beneath the rainforest canopy. The Amazon, long thought to be sparsely inhabited before European contact, apparently supported large, sophisticated cultures that shaped the landscape in ways we're only beginning to understand. These real discoveries are in some ways more exciting than the imaginary ones. They show that the past is more complex and surprising than our models suggest. They reveal human ingenuity and adaptability. They push back the timelines of various developments, and they do all this with actual evidence, artifacts that can be studied, sites that can be excavated, data that can be analysed and debated. The search for understanding the past is ongoing. There are still mysteries, still questions without answers, still surprises waiting in the ground or beneath the waves. But the tools for uncovering these mysteries are the tools of systematic investigation. Careful excavation, rigorous dating, comparative analysis, peer review, and the willingness to revise theories when evidence demands it. This process may seem less romantic than the search for Mu or Atlantis. It requires patience, technical expertise, and a tolerance for uncertainty. But it has the virtue of actually working, of producing knowledge that builds cumulatively, of creating a picture of the past that, while always incomplete, is grounded in evidence. As you drift further towards sleep, you might feel gratitude for those patient researchers, digging carefully through ancient layers, recording everything, piecing together stories from fragments. They are time travelers of a sort, reaching back to touch the past through the objects people left behind. Their work ensures that the past, while distant, is not entirely lost. We can recover pieces of it, reconstruct parts of the story, hear faint echoes of voices long silent. Not everything survives, but enough does to remind us of the long human journey, the countless generations who lived and struggled and created before us. Part 21. The Romance of Mystery. There is undeniable appeal in the idea that history harbours profound mysteries, that beneath the surface of accepted knowledge lie hidden truths waiting to be discovered. This romance of mystery is part of what makes the Mu story enduringly attractive. We live in an age that often seems over-explained. Science has probed the atom and the genome. Medicine has illuminated the workings of the body. Psychology has mapped the mind. While vast amounts remain unknown, the frontiers of mystery have been pushed back from everyday life. For many people, this creates a sense of disenchantment. The world seems flatter, less magical than it must have appeared to our ancestors. Where once there were dragons beyond the edge of the map, now there are only more coastlines, more ecosystems, more ordinary geography. Where once the heavens were the realm of gods, now we see planets and fusion reactions. Where once consciousness was a divine mystery, now we study neurons and neurotransmitters. This scientific understanding brings tremendous practical benefits, but it can also feel like a loss. Something seems diminished when the rainbow becomes merely refracted light, when thunder is just sound waves from rapid air expansion, when the stars are distant suns rather than divine lights. Lost continent theories promise to restore some of that mystery. They suggest that despite all our science, we don't really know the past. They imply that there are still profound secrets, still hidden chapters in the human story. They offer the thrill of discovery, the possibility that everything might change if we could only find the right evidence. This psychological need for mystery is legitimate. Humans seem to require some sense of the unknown, some space for wonder and imagination. Complete knowledge, even if it were possible, might be psychologically stifling. The question is how we satisfy this need for mystery. Do we invent mysteries by ignoring evidence and embracing speculation? Or do we recognise that genuine mysteries remain, even in a scientific age? The latter approach seems healthier. Science hasn't explained everything. Consciousness remains deeply mysterious. The origin of life is still unclear. Dark matter and dark energy make up most of the universe, yet we don't know what they are. Quantum mechanics reveals behaviour at the subatomic level that defies intuitive understanding. Even in human history there are genuine puzzles. We don't know who built Göbekli Tepe or why. We haven't deciphered the Indus Valley script or Easter Island's Rongorongo. We don't fully understand how ancient societies like the Maya or the Romans collapsed. Archaeological sites are still being discovered that force us to revise our understanding. These real mysteries are engaging precisely because they are real. They can be investigated, evidence can be gathered, progress can be made. They offer the satisfaction of actual discovery rather than the empty thrill of speculation. Perhaps what's needed is not more invented mysteries like Mu, but better communication about the genuine mysteries that remain. Science writers and educators could do more to convey the wonder and uncertainty that still pervades scientific inquiry. Archaeologists could better share the excitement of real discoveries and the questions that drive their work. The romance of mystery doesn't require abandoning evidence. It requires recognizing that evidence reveals as much mystery as it resolves, that every answer opens new questions, that the universe is stranger and more wonderful than any fiction. As sleep draws nearer, your mind can rest in authentic mystery. You don't need to believe in sunken continents to feel awe at existence, at consciousness, at the fact that the universe somehow produced beings capable of wondering about themselves. That mystery is enough. That wonder is real. Part 22. Water, Memory and Dreams. Water has always been associated with memory in human mythology and psychology. The rivers of forgetfulness and memory in Greek mythology, Lethe and Mnemosyne. The practice of water baptism as symbolic rebirth, washing away the old self. The ocean as a primordial origin, the womb from which life first emerged. In dreams, water often represents the unconscious, the realm of feelings, and memories that lie beneath conscious awareness. Deep water suggests hidden depths. Drowning can symbolize being overwhelmed by emotion. Crossing water represents transition and transformation. From this psychological perspective, the image of a lost civilization beneath the ocean becomes rich with meaning. Mu represents forgotten aspects of the self, knowledge or capabilities we once possessed but have lost access to. The sinking of Mu symbolizes repression, the submersion of parts of ourselves beneath conscious awareness. The quest to rediscover Mu, then, becomes a quest for self-knowledge, for recovering what has been lost or forgotten within our own psyches. The survivors who carry fragments of Muyan wisdom to other lands represent the ways that repressed material continues to influence us, surfacing in disguised forms, shaping our behaviour and beliefs without our conscious recognition. This Jungian reading treats Mu as a collective symbol, an archetype of lost wholeness that resonates across cultures because it touches something universal in human psychology. Whether or not any historical Mu existed becomes irrelevant. What matters is the symbol's psychological truth and utility. Dreams themselves often feature impossible architectures, lost places, buildings that seem familiar yet have never existed. These dream locations feel significant, pregnant with meaning, yet they vanish upon waking, leaving only a vague memory of something important that has slipped away. Perhaps Mu is something like a collective dream, a shared imagining that has taken on solidity through repeated telling. It exists in the same space as literary landscapes, Middle-earth, Narnia, Hogwarts. These places are not physically real, yet they have a kind of existence in human culture and imagination. They shape how people think and feel. They provide shared reference points. They influence real-world choices and values. In this sense, arguing about whether Mu really existed may be asking the wrong question. A better question might be, what does Mu mean? What need does this story fulfill? What does its persistence tell us about human psychology and culture? The ocean in the Mu story serves as more than setting. It is the medium of forgetting and potential remembering, the barrier between present and past, the deep space that holds secrets. To search for Mu is to search for origin, for meaning, for connection to something larger and older than the individual self. Water itself is the perfect metaphor for the unconscious. Fluid, deep, dark in its depths, capable of great calm and great violence, necessary for life yet potentially deadly, covering most of the Earth's surface yet largely unexplored in its deepest regions. When you submerge in water, sounds change, becoming muffled and strange. Vision blurs, movement slows. You enter a different physics, a different set of rules. It's like entering a different state of consciousness, crossing a threshold into an altered reality. Sleep, too, is a kind of submersion, a descent into depths where normal rules don't apply. In sleep, the impossible becomes possible. Time moves strangely. Dead friends appear alive again. You find yourself in your childhood home, which is also somehow your current apartment. You discover rooms that were always there but you somehow never noticed before. These dream experiences, universal yet bizarre, suggest that consciousness is stranger and more layered than waking awareness indicates. There are depths within us, regions we visit nightly yet can barely remember, where symbols and narratives unfold according to their own logic. Mu, as a story, as a myth, exists in that borderland between waking and sleeping, between history and dream, between evidence and imagination. It is most real precisely when we don't insist on its literal truth, when we allow it to float in the realm of story where it belongs. Your breathing is very slow now, very regular. You're sinking like a stone dropping through water, down through layers of consciousness. The surface with its light and movement is far above. You're descending toward the bottom, toward the dark sand where ancient things rest. But there's no fear in this descent. The pressure is comforting, like a weighted blanket. The darkness is soft. You're not drowning but returning, going back to some original place, some source. The ocean receives you, the past receives you, sleep receives you. And in that receiving, in that letting go, perhaps you touch something true, something beyond argument about continents and evidence. You touch the mystery of being, the wonder of consciousness, the strange fact of existence. That's the real discovery, the real treasure beneath the waves. Part 23, The Gift of Uncertainty. One of the most valuable things we can learn from the Mu story, paradoxically, is the importance of uncertainty and the value of not knowing. Modern culture often treats uncertainty as a problem to be solved. We want definite answers, clear explanations, unambiguous facts. This desire is understandable. Certainty feels safe. It provides clear guidance for action. It settles debates and allows us to move forward. But absolute certainty is rarely available, especially regarding complex questions about the past, consciousness, meaning, or value. And the demand for certainty can lead us astray when we embrace false certainty rather than living with productive uncertainty. The Mu story, in its confident claims unsupported by evidence, illustrates false certainty. Churchward presented his theories with absolute conviction, as if they were established facts rather than speculation. This certainty was part of the appeal. It promised to resolve mysteries, to provide the answers that mainstream scholarship supposedly concealed or ignored. But this false certainty closed off inquiry rather than opening it. Once you know that Mu existed, and that it explains all these cultural similarities and mysterious monuments, you stop asking questions. The mystery is solved. There's nothing more to investigate. True intellectual humility works differently. It acknowledges what we don't know while carefully establishing what we can know with varying degrees of confidence. It recognizes that most historical and scientific knowledge is provisional, subject to revision as new evidence emerges. It distinguishes between well-supported conclusions, reasonable hypotheses, and pure speculation. This attitude of uncertainty can feel uncomfortable. It means living with ambiguity, with questions that may never be fully answered. It means accepting that some mysteries might remain mysterious, that not every puzzle has a solution, that reality might be messier and less satisfying than the neat stories we tell about it. But this uncertainty also has gifts. It keeps us curious. It maintains humility. It allows us to change our minds when evidence demands it. It prevents us from clinging to theories that have been superseded. It keeps the conversation going rather than shutting it down. In Zen Buddhism, there's a concept called beginner's mind, approaching situations with openness and lack of preconception, even if you're an expert. The beginner sees possibilities that the expert might miss because their knowledge has created fixed patterns of thinking. Maintaining beginner's mind means staying curious, questioning your own assumptions, remaining open to surprise. This attitude is valuable not just in spiritual practice, but in any kind of inquiry. The scientists who make breakthrough discoveries are often those who question established theories, who remain open to unexpected findings, who can tolerate the discomfort of not knowing until better evidence arrives. The demand for certainty about questions like Mu often comes from anxiety. We want to believe we understand the past, that human history has a clear narrative, that we know where we came from and how we got here. Uncertainty about these questions can feel existentially threatening, but perhaps we can learn to be comfortable with not knowing. Perhaps we can find peace in uncertainty, recognizing it not as failure but as the honest acknowledgement of where we actually are. The things we know for certain are actually quite limited. I know I'm conscious right now. I know I have sensations and thoughts. Beyond that, even the existence of an external world is philosophically uncertain, though it's extremely reasonable to believe in it. Most of what we call knowledge is actually high confidence belief, supported by evidence but not absolutely certain. And that's okay. We can act on high confidence beliefs while maintaining enough flexibility to revise them if needed. The Mu story invites us to notice the difference between genuine knowledge and comforting belief. It shows us what happens when we let the desire for certainty override the demand for evidence. It offers a cautionary tale about the seductions of false certainty. And paradoxically, by showing us this, it gives us a gift. the reminder to hold our beliefs lightly, to stay curious, to keep asking questions, and to be honest about what we don't know. As you rest on the edge of sleep, you can let go of the need to know. You can release the questions that have no answers. You can rest in the simple mystery of being, the wonder of consciousness, the strange fact that there is something rather than nothing, that you exist to experience this moment. The not knowing is okay, the uncertainty is okay. You don't need all the answers to be at peace. You can simply be here, now, breathing, drifting, letting go. Part 24. Legacy and Influence. Though Mu does not exist as a physical reality, it exists as a cultural phenomenon, an idea that has influenced art, literature, and popular imagination for nearly a century. Science fiction and fantasy writers have used Mu as a setting or plot element in countless stories. Comic books have featured Muyan characters and artifacts. Films and television shows have incorporated elements of the myth. The idea of a lost Pacific civilization has become part of the shared vocabulary of speculative fiction. In music, bands have named themselves after Mu or referenced it in lyrics. In visual art, the image of sunken ruins and lost civilizations appears regularly, tapping into the aesthetic appeal of decay, mystery, and the passage of time. New Age spirituality continues to draw on Mu as part of its alternative cosmology. Channelers claim to receive messages from Mian spirits, or to access ancient Mian wisdom. Practitioners of past life regression describe memories of lives lived in Mu. The Lost Continent serves as a source of supposed ancient spiritual teachings. In Japan, there's been particular interest in Mu, partly because of James Churchward's claims that Japanese legends preserved Muyan knowledge, and partly because the idea of a Pacific motherland resonates with certain Japanese nationalistic and spiritual movements. Books about Mu appear regularly in Japanese esoteric literature. This cultural influence, regardless of Mu's historical status, is real and significant. Ideas have power. Stories shape how people understand the world and themselves. The Mu myth, even as myth, has left traces throughout culture. We might ask whether this influence has been positive or negative. On one hand, Mu has inspired imagination and creativity. It has given artists and writers a rich source of imagery and themes. It has encouraged people to think about deep time, about the fragility of civilization, about humanity's place in a vast cosmos. On the other hand, it has spread misinformation and encouraged rejection of scientific evidence. It has sometimes been used to appropriate indigenous cultures or to promote racial theories. It has contributed to a broader pattern of pseudoscience that erodes public trust in expert knowledge. Perhaps the influence has been mixed, as is often the case with cultural phenomena. Ideas that begin in one context can be used in various ways as they spread. Mu has been used for entertainment, spiritual exploration, scholarly speculation, and fraudulent claims. Each use has different implications and effects. What's interesting is how resilient the idea has been. Despite being debunked repeatedly, despite the overwhelming geological evidence against it, Mu persists in popular imagination. This persistence suggests that it serves needs that facts alone cannot address. Humans are not purely rational beings. We have emotional, psychological, and spiritual needs that go beyond empirical knowledge. We need stories, symbols, myths, to help us make sense of experience and to give meaning to our lives. We need mystery and wonder. We need connection to something larger than ourselves. Science provides one way of meeting some of these needs. The actual story of cosmic and biological evolution, the history of the Earth and life upon it, can inspire awe and wonder. The genuine mysteries still remaining in physics and consciousness can engage our curiosity. But science operates primarily in the realm of fact and mechanism. It describes what and how, but doesn't directly address why in the sense of meaning or purpose. For many people, scientific knowledge is necessary but not sufficient. They seek additional sources of meaning: religion, philosophy, art, myth. Mu, as a modern myth, attempts to provide such meaning. It suggests that there's more to human history than mainstream accounts reveal. It implies that we're connected to a deep past that still holds relevance. It offers mystery and wonder in a disenchanted world. The challenge is finding ways to meet these legitimate needs without abandoning truth and evidence. Can we have mystery and meaning while still respecting what we've learned about how the world actually works? Can we tell stories that inspire without spreading falsehood? Perhaps the answer lies in being clear about categories. Stories can be meaningful without being literally true. Myths can provide insight without being historical. Art and imagination have their own validity without needing to be factual. We can enjoy the Mew story, find meaning in it, use it as inspiration for creativity, while still maintaining clarity that it's a story, not history. We can hold it lightly, appreciating it for what it offers without insisting it must be real. Your mind is very quiet now, thoughts barely rippling the surface. The story of Mu has been told in all its complexity and all its dimensions: historical, geological, psychological, cultural, spiritual, and now it can be released, like water flowing back to the ocean, like breath returning to the air. Part 25. The Journey Home. We've travelled far tonight, across vast oceans and through depths of time. We've explored the idea of Mu from every angle, examining its origins, its claims, its appeal, and its meaning. We've considered geology and archaeology, psychology and mythology, indigenous knowledge and modern science. And now, like all journeys, this one must end. Or rather, transform, as you drift from waking consciousness into sleep, from the structured narrative of our exploration into the free-flowing imagery of dreams. What will you carry from this journey? Perhaps nothing explicit. Perhaps by morning, the details of what we've discussed will have faded, leaving only vague impressions. That's okay. Not everything needs to be remembered for it to have served its purpose. The point was never really about Mu itself. The Lost Continent was a vehicle, a way of exploring larger questions about knowledge and belief, about how we relate to the past, about the stories we tell and why we tell them. We've touched on themes of loss and memory, certainty and doubt, imagination and evidence, science and spirituality. We've seen how human longings shape the stories we embrace, how cultural needs can be more powerful than facts in determining what people believe. And perhaps, underneath it all, we've touched something universal. The poignant awareness that time takes everything, that civilizations rise and fall, that what seems permanent is temporary, that nothing lasts except in memory and story. This awareness doesn't have to be depressing. It can be liberating. If nothing lasts, then we're freed from the burden of trying to make anything permanent. We can appreciate what exists now in this moment without demanding that it endure forever. The ocean, which has been our companion throughout this journey, knows this truth. Water doesn't cling to any form. It flows into whatever shape contains it, adapts to every container, returns always to its own nature. The wave rises and falls, each one unique, yet all made of the same water, eternal in its impermanence. You too are like water in this way. The specific forms of your life, your experiences, your thoughts and feelings, are constantly changing. Yet something persists, some essence that observes the changes, that experiences the flow. In sleep, this observing consciousness recedes, becomes less active. The ego, which during waking hours works so hard to maintain its story, its identity, its certainties, finally rests, and in that rest something deeper emerges, the dreaming self that speaks in symbols and images, that knows truths the waking mind cannot articulate. Maybe you'll dream of oceans tonight. Maybe you'll find yourself in ancient cities, walking streets that never existed, yet feel completely real. Maybe you'll fly or swim or transform into something other than yourself. The usual rules won't apply. Anything will be possible. And in that limitless space of dreaming, perhaps you'll touch something that the Mew story points toward but can never fully capture. The mystery at the heart of existence. The wonder that there is a universe at all. That consciousness has emerged to contemplate itself. That we find ourselves here, aware and alive, however briefly, in this vast cosmos. This is the true Lost Continent. Not a physical place in the Pacific, but the depths within consciousness itself. The inner ocean we visit every night yet barely remember. The source from which imagination flows. The darkness from which light emerges. We are, all of us, survivors of our own forgotten continents. We've lived through transformations as complete as any sinking of land beneath the sea. The person you were 10 years ago has drowned in time. The child you were exists only in scattered memories and photographs, artifacts dug up from the past. And yet, something continues. Something survives every transformation and loss. Call it consciousness, call it the soul, call it simply the ongoing process of being alive. It persists through all changes, like the water that remains water whether it forms a wave, a river, or a cloud. The story of Mu, in the end, is about this continuity and this loss. It's about the part of us that remembers and the part that forgets. It's about what we carry forward and what we leave behind. It's about the stories we tell to make sense of the inexplicable fact that we exist at all. So rest now. Let the story go. Let the questions dissolve. Let the mysteries remain mysterious. You don't need to solve anything or understand everything. You just need to breathe, to be, to allow yourself to sink into the comfort of not knowing. The peace of uncertainty. The deep rest that comes when you finally stop trying to figure it all out. The ocean holds you. The darkness surrounds you, not threatening but protective, like a mother's embrace. Time slows. The boundaries between self and world grow thin. You're floating in that borderland between waking and sleeping, between thinking and dreaming, and beneath you, whether they exist or not, lie all the lost lands, all the sunken cities, all the forgotten civilizations, not just Mu, but all of them. Atlantis, Lemuria, the civilizations that actually did exist and then vanished, leaving only ruins and questions. Beneath you lie all the versions of yourself you've been and lost, all the possibilities that never actualized, all the roads not taken. They're still there, in a sense, held in the memory of time, preserved in the amber of the past. Not accessible, not recoverable, but not entirely gone either. They exist the way everything that ever happened still exists, as part of the total history of the universe, woven into the causal fabric that led to this moment, to you, here, now, breathing, drifting, letting go. Sleep comes like the tide, inevitable and gentle, washing over you in waves. You don't fight it, you welcome it, you surrender to it, as you surrender to water when you float on your back, trusting it to hold you, trusting yourself to it. The story of Mu is complete. The journey is over. The lost continent remains lost or remains found, depending on how you understand those words, but it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is this: the sweet descent into sleep, the fading of thought, the dimming of awareness, the blessed rest at the end of a long day. So breathe deeply. Feel your body heavy and relaxed. Notice how your mind has grown quiet, how thoughts no longer demand attention, how you're simply present, simply being, simply drifting. The sleepless survivors have kept you company on this journey through the night, through the depths of ocean and time, through the story of Mu. But now even we must fade, our voices becoming quieter, more distant, until they merge with the whisper of your breath, the rhythm of your heartbeat, the soft static of neurons settling into sleep. The lost Pacific civilization, whether it existed or not, has given us this: hours of peaceful exploration, a journey through mystery and meaning, a path from waking into sleep. And that was always the true destination, not Mu itself, but this place you've arrived at now, this threshold where consciousness releases its hold and dreams begin. Thank you for travelling with us tonight. Thank you for listening, for wondering, for allowing yourself to be carried on these tides of story and speculation. May your sleep be deep and peaceful. May your dreams be gentle. May you wake refreshed, ready for whatever tomorrow brings. And if you remember anything from tonight's journey, let it be this: the past is gone but not forgotten, lost but still present in its effects, vanished but preserved in story. And that's enough. That continuity of memory and meaning, that thread of story connecting us to what came before, that's what makes us human. The ocean breathes, the earth turns, the stars wheel overhead, and you, at last, release into sleep, drifting down through layers of consciousness, down to where dreams wait, down to the depths where rest is complete, and renewal begins. Good night, dear traveller. May peace and wonder find you. May the mystery of Mu and all mysteries cradle you gently, and may you sleep well, knowing that some questions don't need answers, some stories don't need to be true to be valuable, and some journeys are worthwhile simply because they lead us here, to this moment of rest, this blessing of sleep, this small peace at the end of a long exploration. The lost continent sleeps beneath the waves, and so do you. Good night.